Hello, my name is Annie Rogers, and on behalf of the ADDitude team, I'm so pleased to welcome you to today's ADHD Experts presentation titled Family Ties, Managing and Advocating for Your Child with ADHD in the Extended Family. And leading today's webinar, we are very pleased to welcome Janette Patterson. Janette has been a practicing therapist for the past 30 years, offering individual, couple, and family therapy in nonprofit agencies and in private practice. As a marriage and family therapist, she specializes in LD, ED, and ADHD issues, as well as anxiety disorders and addiction disorders in adolescents and adults. She's a consultant to private schools and other educational facilities, and lectures and presents regularly. In addition to her work as a therapist, Janette has worked for the last 20 years in a variety of school settings as administrator, teacher, mentor to other teachers, and consultant to other schools. She currently works in private practice in Westchester, Pennsylvania, offering marriage and family therapy and DBT therapy and skills training. Today, Janette will address how we can help grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, all family members to really better understand ADHD and to contribute to solutions when we need them. She will address common misperceptions about ADHD, explore strategies for improving interactions with family members, suggest some advocacy skills and strategies, and help us build a toolkit that grows our support team, which everyone can use. So before I hand over the microphone to Janette, I have just a few housekeeping items to get out of the way. Those of you who are tuned into the live webinar, you may download the slides anytime by clicking on the event resources section of your webinar screen. And if you are interested in the certificate of attendance option, please keep an eye out for instructions in an email that you will receive about an hour after the live broadcast. If you're listening in replay or podcast mode, just visit ADDitudemag.com and search for podcast 365 to access the slides, the replay, certificate of attendance option. And if you support the work we're doing here at ADDitude to strengthen the ADHD community, we encourage you to visit ADDitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for the magazine for your family or to share with a teacher or a loved one who could benefit from greater ADHD understanding. So without further ado, I'm very pleased to hand over the microphone to Janette Patterson and this very important talk on strengthening family ties and advocating for your child with ADHD. Janette, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Annie. Just getting started, right? The concern here is, right, so how do we relate to family members and deal with situations within the whole extended family? And that can be tricky regardless of whether there is somebody with ADHD or any special needs. It can just be really hard, right? Why? Because we don't pick our family members. We're stuck with them, right? It's very different from choosing your circle of friends where if you don't get along, you can say, maybe I just let that one be. I'll just find different people, right? But we're stuck with our family members, and we're stuck with family history, and we're stuck with our family culture, which can be challenging. Like maybe there is a family culture of we have grand family dinners for Thanksgiving and for major holidays, and then everybody has to gather, and it's a really important meal, and then we are getting all worried because our ADHD kid just doesn't sit still, right? Those kinds of questions or concerns is what we're wanting to address in our talk today. So what is it that can get in the way when our goal is to get along with our family members and support our ADHD family member, let's say our child, but it could also be just maybe you have a family member that you want to support, your nephew, your aunt, you know, whoever it is, right? So we can just expand this to just anybody. And the goal is to get along in the family functioning that we have. But that can be hard. So what can get in the way is, there we are. There can be all sorts of misunderstandings and misinterpretations of what we observe within the family gathering, let's say, right? So as we know, individuals with ADHD can get very easily distracted. They just don't pay attention very well, right? And if we have family gatherings where family members expect that everyone is on their best behavior, then that can be hard for individuals with ADHD, right? So out of that can arise misunderstandings and just misinterpretations of what we see, right? So maybe little Johnny, who has ADHD, is just not sitting perfectly still at the dinner table because actually he just can't, right? And then maybe other relatives see that and they have a misunderstanding there, right? They think that he's just unruly and misbehaved, and maybe we as parents are not doing a good enough job of teaching little Johnny to mind his manners, right? So that can be just a ignorance of just not knowing what the characteristics are of ADHD, or what the driving forces are that drive individuals with ADHD to certain behaviors, right? Sometimes it's just that we have a difference in opinions, right? We all do. We all have opinions of like what's a nice setting for a family gathering. Well, we should meet at a restaurant, and somebody else says, no, it should actually be at home because then we can feel more comfortable. It's not about right or wrong. It's just a difference in opinions, right? But those can then lead to misunderstandings, or just not getting the cues or the conversation message right, because we're just not of the same opinion. We have different personal preferences. So that can be that's really important to track for, right? What is going on here? Could it be that family members are just not aware of what ADHD is and how it manifests? Is it that we just have a different opinion? Maybe my person just doesn't know, right? What can totally trip us up is just maybe doing something that another family member judges, right? Maybe my ADHD kid is sitting at the table and reaches across the table and, grabs some food or something. And there is Aunt Betsy, and she glances, right, and says, I can't believe your son is so misbehaved, and you're just melting, right? Oh my God, feeling embarrassed, right? Oh, this is just awful. That can totally get in the way of being able to handle a family gathering or a situation in the family effectively, right? So the goal is, how do we get along in the family? How can we make things better? Being judged or feeling judged, right, gets in the way. The resulting embarrassment, right, can get in the way. Our ADHD family member feeling embarrassed, making things worse for them, gets in the way. Feeling ashamed, which is a theme for individuals with ADHD. The real core experience of there is something wrong with me, right? Or for parents, right, to feel that shame of there is something wrong with my child is flawed, can be such a heartache and can cause such tragic situations of misunderstandings and challenges in family settings. And maybe for our question and answer section, we can even address some of the examples where maybe there are some situations where you've experienced it within your family. Maybe there's a theme there where there is an extended family member, an aunt or uncle who has what I call a bad habit of shaming. How do we address that when we know that every year we gather for Thanksgiving and that's what we're expecting, that's what we have to deal with? So something to really keep an eye out, right? How do we become aware of it? And then more importantly, how do we cope with that? Feeling guilty, that's another big theme for individuals with ADHD, right? Is we get ourselves into trouble and we feel bad, right? Because we think we know how to do the right thing, but then we just trip ourselves up anyway, right? And then we feel bad. Or likewise, the family members, right, who have a bad habit of guilt tripping, right, of laying the guilt trip on you. Like, I can't believe you're parenting your child that way, right? I mean, you should know better, right? I thought I told you how to raise your child, or, whatever the message is. So looking out for that, right? And the question, how do we cope with that? What else can get in the way is the actual getting triggered, right? Being at a family gathering, somebody says something and it just hits you the wrong way and you just lose it, right? Or you've got your ADHD child and she's really wanting to get up and just play, and but we need to get her to stay sitting at the dinner table, but she just can't handle it, and then she's got the meltdown, right? So the behavioral dysregulation is an actual diagnostic criteria for getting the ADHD diagnosis, the emotional and behavioral dysregulation. And there is the emotional dysregulation, right? Feeling overwhelmed, feeling too much of the emotion, right? Anxiety, fear, and not being able to rein it in, just feeling so out of sorts and swept away by the intensity of the emotion. That can totally get in the way for us to have a positive family experience. The other thing that can also trip us up sometimes, and people with ADHD tend to have that as well, is this what's called magical thinking, right? It's not that bad. It's going to just be okay. No worries. I can handle it. Yeah, maybe a touch of denial, right? And then being in the family setting, and then the whole thing unravels and we're not okay, right? So what is it that we can do when one or the other or more of these challenges happen, right? So how can we cope when something goes awry in the family setting, or how can we set it up in such a way that things can be better or can improve, right? So first of all, most important in my mind is that we practice becoming aware of what's going on. So self-awareness, maybe having conversations with your family member, your child, your partner, your sibling, whoever it is, right? Practicing becoming aware of what is it that's going on inside of me? What are my thoughts? What are my feelings right now? What is it that's going on, right? What is it that I need to address, so that you can look for strategies. For many people, that piece is missing. Something happens and they get swept up in the experience, and then we're shooting from the hip, not really using strategies, and possibly making things worse rather than better. So developing a sense of awareness of what's going on is a number one strategy, which takes practice, of course. And then learning to effectively advocate for yourself or for your person with ADHD, right? How to do that. There's communication strategies, of course. What you will want to practice just fundamentally is to not take anything personally, to not take it personally when your extended family member does whatever it is that they're doing. There goes Uncle Timmy again, right? Doing this thing where he rolls his eyes and sighs and says, I can't believe this is happening again, right? Which just is so devastating. But there goes Uncle Timmy again. I'm not taking it personal. I'm not judging it. I'm just observing what's happening here. It is something that needs to be addressed, and I might need to pull Uncle Timmy aside and offer some information, involve him in a conversation to address what we're struggling with. Hey, Uncle Timmy, when you judge my child, right, it's really not helpful at all. It makes him feel bad and it makes me feel bad. And what's going on is that my child has ADHD, and that's really the best he can do to cope. And what's more helpful is if maybe you just ignore it, the behavior. Maybe you just smile at my son and say, it's okay, we'll get through this, it's going to be better. Do something else, but please don't judge my son, right? So practicing self-advocacy by recognizing this is the other person's stuff. That's not my stuff. I don't need to take that personal. I don't need to judge it. We're not judging. DBT therapy, rule number 1, right? We practice non-judgmental stance. No judging, just observing what's going on. How do we best address that, right? The goal is to get along. So what can help with communicating more effectively? How do we address concerns, right? Never address the concern in the moment when it's happening, in the heated moment when, let's say the person with ADHD is like throwing the coffee mug because they're just like done with whatever. And then Aunt Betsy says, I can't believe this is happening. This is terrible. And Uncle Timmy is like, you got to leave. I can't stand this. At that moment, it's not an opportune moment, right? We can't really have a conversation. Rather, to find a moment when everybody is quiet, everybody is calm, we're getting along, and to see if you can invite family members into a conversation, like Aunt Betsy, Uncle Timmy, do you have a moment? Would you be willing to sit and talk with me a little bit about what's going on, like when we visit? And, it's really important to me that we find some better ways to handle situations when things get challenging, right? Focus on the positive. Focus on the goal, right? The goal is to get along. I want to be able to visit with you and have a good time. I want for my children to feel comfortable visiting with you. So the goal is to see how we can make that happen. We're not wanting to judge anybody. It's not about pointing the finger at anybody. You're to blame. It's about how we can find ways to enjoy each other's company, because we're family, right? And we didn't choose each other. We're born into the family. Here we are, and we can't help it. We love each other, right? Because we're family. How can we make it better? And to see if you can find where your family members are at. What is it that works for them? What is it that how do they experience their family life? To see if we can start there. I know, Uncle Timmy, that you like when people are quiet at the dinner table, and I know that my children are rather noisy. And I respect that you prefer having people be mindful. And what is it that we could do to make it easier for everybody? Because my kids are actually rather loud. They are. It's not because I'm doing anything wrong with my parenting style. It's just that they're bubbly. They are, right? So how about we don't have hour-long meals? What if we just say we sit for 20 minutes and then the kids can get up? And maybe then we just have like the adults at the table. How about that? So we're looking for ways to engage family members into a conversation, and look for ways to where they can stay open to the conversation and collaborate. We don't want to tell them what to do, because I'm sure you know that usually doesn't work very well. So educating the family about ADHD, of course, is totally important, right? To meet them where they're at. Uncle Timmy, do you know about ADHD? And do you know how it's like, what the behaviors are that my child has that are due to the ADHD? Do you can I explain to you how when you try and get my daughter to talk with you, right? And she keeps looking away, right? And you keep saying, hey, don't disrespect me. You got to keep looking at me. Keep looking at me. Actually, that's just because she's got ADHD. She just kind of, her mind wanders off. And all you need to do is just keep reminding her to check in with you, right? Just invite her back into the conversation. It's just what ADHD is for some people, right? So find ways to stay positive and inviting, give concrete information. Maybe you have a pamphlet, like an explanation of what is ADHD, how do you work with people who have ADHD, right? Ask them if they have any questions, rather than just assuming that maybe they know everything, right? Do you know what happens after a while when you just sit for hours and hours, right? Maybe you can do that, Uncle Timmy, but somebody with ADHD probably can't do that. Can we talk about that, right? So education is key. ADHD is a condition that you're born with, right? You don't just acquire it at some point. You're neurologically wired that way. And many people still don't know that, right? This has nothing to do with willpower, or, if you cared enough, you would mind, right? No, this is a condition. This is how we function, right? And we need to learn how to support the person. And the person, of course, can do a lot to learn how to cope more effectively and integrate themselves into the family. But the more everyone in the family knows how what the dynamics are and how to support each other, the better, right? So, okay, but let's say all of that, right? We're doing everything we can, and then something happens, and we're getting into like a mess, right? There it goes, and we're just so upset. How can we address in the heat of the moment the dysregulation of one or the other family member? May not even be the person with ADHD. Maybe it's grandpa who, for whatever reason, has had it, right? And he goes off, right? Or maybe we have a family member who just, is in a tough spot situationally. Maybe they're worried about their job situation or whatnot, and we're getting into some dispute of some sort. How can we deal with that, right? So is it possible to remind each other of the goal, which is, hey, you guys, this is our family dinner. Is it possible to just take a deep breath and remember that we just want to get along? Can we put our differences aside? Is it possible to kind of set the reset button, right? Can you find maybe somebody else in the family that can be an ally, right? Where you can say, hey, can you help with just diffusing the situation, right? Let's see how we can work on this together. How about you take grandpa outside? Maybe you just take him for a walk, right? And then maybe we can just calm down, right? A really good strategy for expected family gatherings, like let's say Thanksgiving, right? That's coming up at some point, right? Is to cope ahead. So that's a DBT strategy. Coping ahead means that you already know that this is a situation where things can get challenging. So what are some tools and strategies that you can already pack in your toolbox, so to speak, that can be helpful in case you need them, right? So you're preparing, you're coping ahead. So what would that look like for whatever the family gathering is, or the family situation that you already know is going to happen, right? So next week we're going to travel to grandma's house, and yeah, that's going to be challenging because it's going to be an 8-hour car ride, and then grandma is going to want to sit and talk for hours because she will want to hear everybody's story. That's just going to be really challenging. How can we prepare for the car ride? How can we prepare for sitting for hours? What are some strategies that could help the children or my partner to be able to cope as best as possible? So creating a toolbox of strategies, right? Some really important strategies involve timing, setting a time, meaning you could schedule. So in terms of like the example of going to grandma's house and then sitting in the car for hours and then sitting at grandma's house for hours, maybe, right? So breaking up the car ride into chunks with breaks, having snacks in the car for the kids, having toys in the car for the kids, music, games, you name it, all of the strategies that you probably all know already. But then we arrive at grandma's house, and then she says, all right, let's everybody sit down. I made some hot chocolate. Let's talk for hours. Maybe, right, is it possible to say, great, grandma, I'm like totally willing to sit with you, but my kids need to like get a half hour of playtime in. So they're going to go and play a little bit, and then, or maybe it's nighttime and maybe they need to go to bed. And then we might have to say, grandma, how about better timing for sitting and talking is tomorrow in the morning. So finding the right timing, scheduling wisely, finding breaks, using humor can be a great strategy, right? Looking at the bright side of things, doesn't have to be a tragedy, right? Grandma, it's so good to see you. I wish we could stay up for hours, but we're really, really tired, right? We just gotta go to bed, but tomorrow is another day, and tomorrow we're gonna have so much fun. So looking at the positive, finding the humor in life, if at all possible, can be such a good strategy, right? So at any moment, we're wanting to recognize that anything that happens is an opportunity for us to do something with it. We don't have to repeat the same thing over and over again, which is what tends to happen, right? There she goes again. That's what she always does, right? Oh my God. And then we do our thing that we always do because that is just what happens. So at any moment, we could also say, all right, so here is a situation now, and this is an opportunity for me now to use my skills, as we say in DBT therapy, right? What are some strategies? How can I cope with this situation? First of all, how do I make sure that I get to as much of a calm place as possible? Can I take a deep breath so that I can have a clearer mind to look for some strategies that help me cope with whatever it is that's going on, right? So practicing being mindful, right? Reminding yourself, reminding everybody in the family that, hey, we're family, right? We love each other. We mean well, even if something goes wrong. It's very likely that that person or whoever causes something did not wake up that morning thinking, how could I totally mess up today, right? That doesn't happen. Rather, stuff happens. And then we know, well, everybody is trying to do their best, but sometimes that's just something happens. So how can we now deal with this as best as possible, right? It takes a lot of practice, right? Practicing being mindful, practicing not taking things personal, practicing not judging anything, not judging myself, not judging grandma and grandpa, not judging maybe the family member that's always the one that just destroys the harmony in the family. Maybe not judging them either. That's just the way they are. And deep down inside, everybody means well and tries the best they can. And maybe that's just all they can do. And then the question is, how can we work skillfully with this situation? How can we make the best of what we have? And with practice, things can get better, right? So working within the family is very complex, right? So I just did a very broad brush stroke, right? Just kind of touching on some of the concerns that can bubble up within families and getting along within the family. And I touched on some strategies and maybe exploring how to build your own set of strategies. But of course, for every family, that set of strategies can look different. Every family has their own unique ways of how they're functioning. So how to translate what I'm offering there to your family situation, right, is the question that I'm leaving you with, right? How can I make use of what we just learned, right? How does that best fit for my family and my situation? And so I would like to stop at this point and open this up for questions, which I think Annie, you'll moderate that, right?
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for that introduction, the overview. And indeed, as you anticipated, we do have some very specific and detailed questions from our listeners. So I'll get right into them now. The first one, it's how do I deal with well-meaning but unsolicited parenting advice? I feel like I'm always trying to convince and prove that my child has this condition, and it's met with polite, unspoken, but very real disapproval. Such a well-worded question.
Ouch, and it hurts, right? Right. So it's really, really tough, because in that moment when it happens, it's not like you can say something like, stop it, right? This is not okay with me, because it sounds like they're so well-meaning. Well, I'm just telling you, right, what would be better is if you did this or that, right? And, you're just not doing it right. And so the best I can offer there is that you find an opportune moment, not in that moment, but at some point when you can grab your parents and you pull them aside and you check in with them. Hey, mom and dad, do you have a minute? Right. And then invite them into a conversation. Right. I would like to see if you can just talk with me a little bit, because there is something I want to run by you. Stay positive. Right. So you're offering some observations, and you could even say, so I'm just sharing my observations. This is what I'm observing, is that you mean really well. I can totally tell that you love me. I'm your child, and I know you love your grandchildren. It's so clear, and I know you mean well. But in that moment when you do the thing that you do, that's actually not helpful. It's kind of setting up a situation where I can't really address my child's behavior, right? Because now you're offering some unsolicited advice, and I want to be the parent. So I would prefer if when you have some ideas, because I would really appreciate that. I really love when you help me. That's great. So we don't want to get your parents to become defensive and say, well, I'm not going to help you ever again. Right. So I love it when you help. It's just that it'd be better if you could tell me away from the kids, and then maybe we can talk about things. Would that be okay with you? Something like that. So not in the moment when it happens, not with the kids around, because that's really not what we need at all, right? But to address it with the parents, because they mean well, but it's not helpful.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Taking it away from the emotional high point, if you will. And this is a sort of similar question, but I think it's different in an important way. Someone asks, do you have any suggestions for how to answer family members who say that we're using our kids' ADHD diagnoses as an excuse for bad behavior?
Wow. Talk about judgment there, right? And misunderstanding. What do you say to family members who, judge you and have such a negative opinion of what's going on, right? So the question maybe is it possible to pull them aside and have a conversation? Because maybe they're not even aware. Maybe that is a blind spot, right? That they're so judgmental and saying, hey, you're playing the ADHD card here, right? It's yeah. And because your kids have ADHD, they can climb over tables and chairs and do whatever they want. And that just doesn't fly with us, right? Is it possible that they are not even aware that they're judgmental and that that's actually hurtful. And so that might be one strategy, right? Could we have a conversation? Could you pull them aside and say, let's talk this over, because it's really hurtful to us, right? We're dealing with our kids with ADHD, and it's a ongoing journey, right? It can be challenging at times, and we're doing the best we can. So another strategy may be to just recognize that that's the way they are. Those family members that are judgmental and make these hurtful comments, that's the way they are. We don't have to take it personal. We can even talk with the kids and maybe practice recognizing that sometimes we will run into other people, family members, or at school, or in the community, or anywhere, that are rather judgmental and not shy at all to voice their judgmental opinions. And then the best thing we can do is to practice not taking it personal, right? That is what some people do. We know, right? We know that we work hard, that we're doing the best we can. And sometimes people just do their judgmental shaming thing, right? So that might be another coping strategy, is to recognize, well, that's unfortunate. That's what our family members are doing, but we don't have to take it on. We don't have to take it personal. And a strategy could be maybe using humor, not as in like laughing at them like ha 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 or anything, but finding a way to just kind of rise above it. Yep, that's what it is. We're just doing our thing here, right? We don't have to engage, become defensive, or try and fix anything. We could just let people be that way and find a way to maybe shift attention, possibly also by saying, okay, yep, I hear you, but let's just see if we can focus on having, a good time. We're here for Grandpa's birthday. Possibly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of listeners are facing this tough period of puberty, tough for various reasons, but on this front specifically because the kids are getting old enough to realize that. In one case, someone writes that, how do you help your child when they can clearly see that they're being treated differently than their cousins, for example, that they're being treated as bad in comparison. And that can be so hurtful for a child to understand. And especially as they, sort of hit adolescence, and any suggestion of difference is usually, very tough. Any advice for those parents?
Yeah. So, in my thinking, most important is to support your child, right? Is to validate your child experience, right? I get it that for you, this is really hard to witness, right? So you're being judged, you're being put down, you're being treated differently. And that's really hurtful, right? So to validate and to offer having or to offer your presence, to offer to be there for your child, right? I get it. I'm here for you, right? And to maybe have conversations about, well, how can you best cope with that, right? I mean, you could offer your help. You could say, well, I'm here to support you, and I can advocate for you, possibly. But now we're dealing with teenagers, right? We're dealing with adolescents who are now wanting to go out into the world and deal with stuff, right? So the question might be, so what are some strategies that could help you deal with situations where you see that family members are like judging you and they're treating you differently? Are there ways where you can advocate for yourself, right? And say, hey, you guys, right? So only because I forget some stuff, or I'm like, I get distracted, doesn't mean that I'm not interested in being part of the family and doing activities together with everybody else. So include me, right? I want to be part of this, or I want to have a chance to do similar activities than everybody else in the family. It may be possible to have conversations with some family members where, if your teen says, yeah, Uncle Timmy is the one that I just can't believe. He's like always taking Bill, and I don't ever get to go. And he's like just putting me down. Maybe is it possible to have a meeting with Uncle Timmy and say, this is what's happening, and we want to see how to make things better, possibly, right? But it's certainly tricky, right? Because as our kids grow up and get into adolescence, there is more and more of a shift of away from the parents. So we're treading that fine line of recognizing that our kids are out there doing their thing, and how much do we still want to be involved here? At what point do we say, wow, yeah, that's tough, and let's see how you can sort this out, because this is your path now that you're on.
Right. And that leads to another question, which is about educating your child, really about sort of the neuroscience of ADHD. And I think obviously for those preteen and teens, this is going to make more sense. But what do you think of the idea of really making an effort to teach your child about dopamine and the prefrontal cortex, so that the science behind it, so that they can begin that process of advocating for themselves and speaking knowledgeably about the condition when you are not present, whether with teachers or with friends?
Right. So if I understand the question right, so at what age, right, do you teach your kids about the neurological neurotransmitter brain functioning role of ADHD? Like, can you teach your 6-year-old about, well, this is what's happening in your brain, right? So that you can advocate for yourself knowledgeably, right? Or do you wait until the child is older, maybe 12 or maybe 14 or something? And so what I can offer there is that to talk with kids about ADHD is always good. And to make it age appropriate, right? So can you talk with a 4-year-old about ADHD? Sure. Age appropriate, meaning you find the language that your child at age 4 can comprehend, right? And which is very different from when your child is 8 or when your child is 15, right? So a 4-year-old, right, you know, to try and explain how the brain is wired is not going to be helpful, because a 4-year-old does not have the cognitive maturation to conceptualize the inner functionings of the brain or the body, at all. At a certain point, your child is going to be able to make more sense of that. And there are some children who are really bright and they're really interested in like, how does the body work, right? What is this? What's going on inside, right? So if you have a child that really is into that, like I want to like figure out how all about the medical thing and all of that, then go for it, right? And maybe your child is just entering elementary school, but is like totally fired up and is already reading, and you can look at some textbooks and with like the pictures, or look at some YouTube videos, and maybe it makes sense to them. For the most part, what I find though is that until your child gets to about middle school age, anything too detailed in terms of brain functioning is maybe they'll nod their heads and say, okay, yeah, well, I get that, right? But doubtful that it really resonates as in, yeah, I really understand the neurological functioning of the brain and how ADHD impacts that. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you. Now, this is a question, a nuance, right, of ADHD, of course, is that it is often genetic. And that means that sometimes these relatives who are struggling to interact with our children have ADHD themselves, perhaps undiagnosed or untreated. Can you offer advice to people whose family members say things like, well, I managed in life without medication, or back in my day, there was no such thing as ADHD, and how to move forward with them, encouraging them to accept new understanding of the condition?
So the bottom line there is there are people who just have their opinion, right? And they say ADHD just isn't a thing, right? Or I don't have it, right? I was perfectly able to get through school, right? Accommodations, what's that, right? I managed. And it's very doubtful that you'll be able to get through to the person to get them to change their minds. So you could change your tactics altogether and look for some goals, or look for the concern that the person is bringing up, right? What do you mean your child isn't doing their homework? I didn't like doing my homework, but I did it most of the times, and I passed my classes, right? So what do you mean your kid isn't doing the homework, for example? Rather than trying to advocate and say, well, but this is what happens to kids with ADHD, and it looks like maybe you had it too, you struggled in school. You probably won't get anywhere, right? Is to maybe just shift your tactics to, well, so the concern is that, it's really hard for my child to, find the oomph that it takes to sit down after school and do this work. It's just hard. And maybe, is it possible? So you could then maybe feel out the person to see if they're able to relate to that. It's just really hard to, sit and do more paperwork after a whole day at school. And it could be that the person is more able to relate to that when you just take any label off altogether and you just focus on the concern. And they may be able to say, yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, I did the work, but I know what you mean. It was hard at times. Yeah, exactly. It's hard at times. And that's what we're trying to figure out how to support our child with. So what's the goal here? Just looking at, I just want for you to understand that it's really hard for him, my child. And then the question is, how can we support him in that. And the more you can understand that and be patient, right, the better it is for all of us. Does that help?
Yes. Yes. Thank you. We have a number of parents asking if you have suggested language for helping to explain ADHD to elementary age playmates, to friends who may not understand why your child is acting a certain way.
Mm-hmm. Right. So finding a language to relate to, right, for so let's say preschool, kindergarten age. Now you could be playful there. So if you imagine what are kids doing at that age, like 4 and 5? So they play with toys. There's a lot of pretend play. So you could maybe come up with some analogies with like animals, right? So when you play with an old cat just kind of sits there, right? And you can pet it and it just likes to sit in the sun and purr, right? But a little kitten tends to jump around and play a lot and just like climb all over the place. And then you could compare that, right? So a child with ADHD could then say, you know, I feel like that kitten, like that, like pretty much all the time, right? And maybe some kids feel more like a cat that can just lie in the sun, right, and just purr and feel comfortable. But for me, I feel more like a kitten, or maybe find some other analogy like that. Is that helpful?
Gotcha. Yeah. Putting it into the analogy that they can actually see in their mind's eye, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so that could then be an exploration for the parent with their child, like maybe to look for, well, what is it that is in your world, right? What makes sense in your world? And let's see if we can find something that we can describe, that we can use as a descriptor.
Gotcha. This next one I've struggled with myself, so I'm going to make sure to squeeze it in here. We all, I think, parents know on some level the power of routine and how important our daily schedules are. And sometimes when we are with family members, they don't always appreciate or respect those routines. And we know that the consequences of breaking a healthy habit, a routine, can be fairly severe. Do you have any suggestions in language to help our family members understand that we're not being strict, rigid for no reason, that we're doing this with the best intentions of our children in mind?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's also a really tough one, right? So the best thing to maybe endeavor to, first of all, to maybe pull family members aside beforehand, right? To maybe have a conversation and say, you know, I know that this has happened in the past, right? We have a strict bedtime, 8 p.m. And I know that you guys like to just stay in the spirit of things and just keep going. And then it's puts us in this little bit of a difficult spot. And so let's see if we can talk about it. So to maybe have a conversation ahead of time and to say, no disrespect here, but this is really important because that is how our family functions. You don't need to give an explanation or an excuse or anything really. Every human being has a right to their decision and to their lifestyle, but you could offer, right? This is really important to us. So we really need to have our routine, and this is what works for us. And we totally want to recognize that for you, there are different rules and expectations, but that's really important to us.
Yes, I think that's very helpful to take it away from the heat of the moment and to anticipate, so that you're not stuck with in your example, an overtired child who's more prone to emotional dysregulation or behavior. Yeah.
Which none of that you even need to say. You could just say that is how we function in our family. That is just what we do. That's what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are just at an hour, so unfortunately we will have to wrap up today's presentation. But Janette, thank you so much for leading this webinar on sort of family relations and ideas for smoothing out some of the rough spots as we all have the end of our summer vacations with families and then head into the holidays. For those of you who are listening, thank you for joining us. Please know that we do free ADHD expert webinars every week, and our next one is about math anxiety and helping to effectively teach students with dyscalculia. And that is on August 3rd at 1 p.m. Eastern. So we hope that you will join us for that. In the meantime, thank you for being here today. And thank you again, Janette, for this wonderful presentation.
You're welcome.